we put in a PIA request. It was going to go to the Board of Appeals as a special exception for a composting facility. And that's how this all came about, that we found out about the project. As I said, I'm Maria Payan. We have with us tonight Monica Brooks, who is on the executive committee of the Wicomico County NAACP. We have Tyler Lobdell, who is an attorney for Food and Water Watch and Food and Water Justice. We have Kathy Martin, who is an engineer and a technical assistant for Socially Responsible Agriculture Project. And we have Dr. Jacoby Wilson, who is with the University of Maryland School of Public Health and environmental scientist. So with that, we're going to go through a PowerPoint, and if we can get the first slide up here. So So we received a public notice for a Board of Appeals public hearing. It has since been postponed. The hearing was, we thought it was going to be the 27th, which is the normal day and night of the Board of Appeals in Wicomico, which would have been the fourth Thursday. And from PIA, which is Public Information Act, requests that they do in Maryland, we had two in, one to the Maryland Department of Agriculture and one to the Maryland Department of Environment. And from those documents, we have learned that on January 27th, from what we had received first, there was going to be a special exception for this project. It was going to be on the 27th, it was moved to the 20th then. We had put in Public Information Act request to the county, which had not been fulfilled. At that point, we had a lot of partner groups, which included SRAP, Assateague Coastal Trust, and the Coast Keeper. We had the EJ Committee of Wicomico County NAACP, Food and Water Watch, CATA, the Farm Workers Support Committee, Concerned Citizens Against Industrial CAPOs. We had Jay Monteverdi from the Environmental Justice Program at NMATA US. We had Clean Water Action and Chesapeake Physicians for Socially Responsibility, who had sent in a letter basically requesting that this be postponed and the PIA request be fulfilled, that the hearing be held somewhere where there was safe social distancing. And because there is a large population near the projected site that speaks Haitian Creole, that an online hearing would not give them the capabilities without a translator to participate in a meaningful way. So that's how we got here. Okay, so we received a response after we had sent a joint letter to the county, and there was, it was posted on the television. With that, we received documents then the following day, and we found out after that that the applicant basically had postponed. Next slide, please. Okay, so the cover letter to the county application packet, there was a $2.24 million grant. It states on the letter, it should be noted on July 1st, 2021, the Maryland Department of Agriculture awarded Earthcare with a $2.24 million grant to help offset the cost of installing our gasification system for drying and processing 25,000 to 30,000 tons of broiler litter per year. By processing this litter, the system will capture and volatilize more than 2 million pounds of lab verifiable nitrogen per year on site and more than 500,000 pounds of lab verifiable phosphorus per year on site. And again, this process at the county was for a special exception for a composting site, a composting facility. So with that, I'm going to bring up the next slide and introduce Monica Richardson Brooks, who is an environmental and social activist on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. She organized against the expansion of mega poultry complexes. She's a community leader fighting for rights of clean air, water, and equal justice for her community. In response to the threat against her community, Monica helped co-found with Gabby, who's on here, the citizens group Concerned Citizens Against Industrial CAFOs, which successfully stopped the siting of what would have been the largest ever poultry complex in Maryland. She is a member of several coalitions, united in efforts to ensure equitable rights for the rural citizens in her community. Monica serves as the EJ chair, as I mentioned, for the Wicomico County NAACP, and as a commissioner on the Maryland State Environmental Justice and Sustainable Communities Commission. She is also on the board of Assateague Coastal Trust and Socially Responsible Agriculture Project. She is a business leader, an educator, wife, and a mother. Monica is passionate about empowering and educating her children and the community about the importance of service and civic engagement. So with that, I will turn it over to Monica and flip it to the slide, which shows the Owens Branch brick kiln, where the thumbtack is, the site of the proposed facility. Monica, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Maria. Okay. So everyone can just see the site, right? Not me, right? Maria?
Monica. They can see
Okay.
you and
Right.
the slide.
Okay, got it. I'm sorry. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this evening. My name is Monica Brooks, as it was shared, and I'm the Environmental Justice Chair for Wicomico County NAACP. When I just found out information about this gasification plant, I said, here we go again. Many of you on this call, many of us in this community on the west side of Wicomico County have had our share or overabundance of our share of polluters coming to our community. Some years ago, they made the area near Northwest Road and Naylor Mill Road a dumping ground for all these states out, all of these other states to come and literally dump whatever they wanted to dump right here in our community. It was unregulated, nobody cared. They just destroyed a community until the citizens stood up. Fast forward to 6 years ago, once again, our community was offered up as a sacrificial lamb, and the proposal was for 13 mega-sized poultry houses to be placed on top of the Paleo Channel, which is our source of water. Many of us in the county are on well water. This is a shallow aquifer, which is can be easily contaminated, but somehow, some way, our county saw fit to give approval with the zoning for 13 football field size houses to be placed right in our community. Actually, as I'm looking on this map, it's not far from this new project. And when I say here we go again, now it's the county Board of Appeals is being approached to give special exemption, meaning, special credit in order to come and contaminate our community. We have said enough. We are not allowing this. We are not giving license to it. We're not giving approval to it. And if you can see by this zoning map, right at this area where it's Owens Branch and Kiln Road, that's the proposed site of this this new project. And in the dark orange and the yellows, that's all residential, all surrounding the area. Those of us here on the west side, right off of Route 50, off of Naylor Mill Road, Booth Street, Chippewa, Powhatan, Manoa, Delano, all of these streets, you know, on a particular day, you catch wind of that landfill, even if it's right not next to your home, it is a polluter to our community. So now they want to add on to what we already face. Between, on one side, we have the landfill, and then on the left, on the other side, we've got the poultry plant. And both of those on a particular day, you catch wind of it. But this particular project would greatly affect our communities. We have churches here, schools, we have homes. Not only are we talking about destroying the quality of our air, but we're also talking about decreasing property values. We're talking about the opening the door for anyone and everyone to come and open some sort of facility. This facility has sewage, manure, greases and oils from restaurants, body parts from chickens, you name it, it's going in there. All under the guise of gas, creating fuel and energy. No. So the citizens of Wicomico County who live on the west side are not in agreement, and we're gonna fight this just as we fought the chicken houses, the 13 chicken houses and won. We're gonna fight against this and say, we don't want this in our community. They tried to go to Eden, Maryland, and Eden ran them out. So they decided, oh, we'll come over here. Possibly because they think that no one here is gonna fight, or the people here have no say, but we do have a say. And so the purpose of this tonight is to get everyone educated on what's happening, so that you can voice your opinion to your, not only to your, the Board of Appeals and Planning and Zoning, but to all the powers that be, that the west side of Wicomico is not open for dirty business. You want to come to our community and open businesses that are fruitful and benefiting the community, you are welcome. You want to come and pollute our community and risk the lives of our family, you are not welcome. So I'm grateful tonight to be on this panel with some amazing people who are going to give you some really great data on specifics, not only health related, but regulation as well, so that you understand what our rights are. We have rights. And see, it's not a coincidence that this particular project, just as the one we had to fight off the 13 chicken houses before, happened around the holidays. When people are not tuned in, when people are not paying attention. It makes no difference if you post make a post about a hearing if nobody knows it's going on, if nobody sees it, if there's no community engagement. And so what we've learned from some of the information that we received, that we had to fight tooth and nail to get from the county, is that these conversations have been happening for a long time. And when we ask for this information, as is our right as citizens, they delayed and delayed and delayed. So there's a problem. And it's our responsibility to call it out and to tell them that we're not standing for it. So that is what I have to offer at this time. I'll be available later for questions. But there was, I don't know if Maria, well, people are putting things in the chat, but this area here, Kiln Road and Owens Branch, it is listed as heavy industrial, but they're looking to get a special exemption because they don't qualify for what they're trying to do. That's the whole point. They don't qualify, but they're trying to be allowed in. And I say, if people just have this $2.24 million just hanging out there, why don't we use it to sow into our communities? Why don't we use it to make recycling and composting and food, fresh food available for our communities? Why don't we use it for windmills and solar and things that are beneficial to our community, not something that we didn't ask for? And the last thing I want to say is this is our tax dollars. Our tax dollars that we have no say in is being used for something that is of no benefit, and not only no benefit, but a contrary to the well-being of our communities and our families. So when your money's involved, you have a say. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. And again, the special exception was for a compost facility, not for gasification. And the citizens had requested information prior to the hearing. I think that Monica did a good job in showing how close the residential section is to here, and it is again a community that is already overburdened with some problems here environmentally, a lot of odors. We have landfill near there, and it has a high population again of minority and people who have a hard time in order to participate in an online Zoom the way that it was set up, because it should have been advertised and they should have had translators for the Haitian Creole population that is there. With that, I'm going to switch over. Thank you, Monica. Again, we appreciate it. To Tyler Lobdell. Tyler is a staff attorney with Food and Water Watch, where he uses legal advocacy to combat factory farms and the systems that prop up this dangerous industry. He works on these issues at the national, regional, and local levels.
Oh, they won't.
Tyler graduated from Lewis and Clark Law School with honors, where he served as co-editor-in-chief of the Animal Law Review and was awarded the Williamson Public Interest Environmental Law Award. A longtime environmentalist, Tyler spent almost 10 years leading conservation programs across the US before attending law school. Aside from legal work, he currently spends his time raising 2 sons, caring for a flock of rescue chicken, and enjoying the outdoors. Tyler, welcome.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Maria. Not used to having my bio actually read out. It makes me a little bashful, but thank you so much for the introduction. So what I'm going to try to do for everybody today is just kind of get some clarity on the basic terms that Maria and Monica have already sort of introduced us to, a little bit about the process and what is coming up in the public hearing, and then some key points for folks to be aware of from the Wicomico County Zoning Code. But before I dive into any of that, I guess I just want to highlight, and I apologize if I'm preaching to the choir to folks on this call, but want to highlight the importance of engaging in a process like this. This is your opportunity as citizens to be heard. The folks on the Board of Appeals, the members of the Board of Appeals, are entrusted to represent you. And their duty is to represent the interests of all Wicomico citizens. And the only way they're going to know what your take on a particular proposal is if you show up and have your voice be heard. And so I know everyone's busy and these are strange times, but I can't stress enough how critical it is for folks to come out and make sure that these decision makers know where people stand. because the proponent, of course, will be heard. They are the ones driving the ship unless you also engage. So zoning in general, straight from the Board of Appeals website, you know, their job is to promote the public health, safety, general welfare, and prescribe the most desirable use for which land in each zoning district may be adapted, and those uses to be subjected to special regulations while conserving the value of land throughout the county. As was noted before, the site that's being proposed here is already, and you can actually go back, it doesn't actually really matter. The site as it stands is zoned I2, which is heavy industrial. And within, and you know, I'll note, you know, prior to working on issues like this, I probably would have seen heavy industrial district and said, oh, well, I mean, that anything can be there, right? I mean, heavy industry, that's sort of as extreme, or that's as intensive a use as it gets. But that's not really the way zoning codes are written, and it's not the way Wicomico's zoning code is written. So within an I2 zone, there are permitted or permittable uses. So next slide. And so it's not a free-for-all. And the county, you know, a while ago, identified at a pretty granular level those uses that can be permitted in an I2 zone. So this is a chart from the Wicomico County zoning code that shows, and this is industrial districts, and it's showing all of the uses that the county pre-identified as potentially appropriate for an I2 zone. And on the far right of the column, you'll see P and you'll see SE. P is permitted. In other words, there's a presumption that that use is acceptable in an I2 zone. Then there's special exception, which the reason why the county identified certain uses as requiring a special exception is because there are unique concerns that need to be vetted and that the public needs to have an opportunity to weigh in on. And so one of those categories is composting facilities, which has been alluded to, and I'm going to come back to a couple times. And so that's why there's going to be a public hearing before the Board of Appeals, because this project is seeking to come into your area as a composting facility. And based on the code, that requires them to get Board of Appeals approval. And the Board of Appeals is required to make this decision in the public eye with an opportunity for folks to engage. And so, you know, I counted, you know, this is one page of, I think, 3 in the county code that has this table. I counted 53 specific items that the county determined was appropriate. A gasification plant is not included in that list. And so, sort of attendant to that, the absence of a use from a list like this indicates that that use is inappropriate for the area, right? These types of things are not written as catch-alls. I mean, if you look at this list here, we have blacksmithing shops, you know, blending or bottling of beverages, fertilizer manufacturer. They're specific. And they're specific for a reason, because each of those potential uses was considered and was determined to be appropriate. And I'm sure there were uses that were put up and that were determined to be inappropriate and were left off the list. So all to say, absence from the list is as important as a use's presence on the list. So next slide, please. And within this, there are limitations on what special exceptions can be permitted. Again, it's not a free-for-all by any means. And so the purpose of a special exemption is to establish the procedures and criteria for evaluating an application of this kind to make sure that it's appropriate. And again, to give the public an opportunity to weigh in. So next slide, please. And there are specific criteria for approval. And there's a lot of text on some of these slides, and there's no need for folks on this call to read it all or to memorize any of it. I would point you to the very top, section 225-155. That's the code section. So folks that want to do some more in-depth research or familiarize yourself more, simply search online for Wicomico County Zoning Code, and you will access the online version of the entire code. You can find these sections and you can do your own research. But I do want to highlight a few of them. First is subparagraph 2, that the proposed use will not adversely affect the health, safety, and general welfare of the residents or workers in the area. Number 6, the proposed use will not adversely affect transportation network or unduly burden water, sewer, school, park, stormwater management areas, including streams or other public facilities. And then the last one, number 7, will not adversely affect environmental, archaeological, or historical assets of particular interest to the community. And so as folks engage with this process, and as you learn more about this proposal, you need to ask yourself whether a gasification facility like this meets these criteria. Because if it does not, then the Board of Appeals is legally obligated to deny the application. And so as you engage, as you make your voice heard, keep those points in mind, because those are the legal mandates that these decision makers have to look to in rendering their final decision. And then I also just want to flag that in subsection D, it comes right after this in the county code, says that the Board of Appeals may require an impact analysis of any proposed activity. And that can include, but isn't necessarily limited to, environmental impacts, traffic impacts, financial impacts, or quote, any other matter deemed pertinent to the issue before the board. I think there's a more fundamental question, and I'm going to come back to this in just a moment, of whether this is permittable at all under county code. But even, let's make that potentially incorrect assumption for the moment, an impact analysis for a proposal like this is especially important. It's a novel proposal, and I can almost guarantee to you that the 5 members on the Board of Appeals have no idea what a gasification plant, have never been to one, have never lived near one, and so have very, very, very little, if any, familiarity with the potential impacts. And so maybe Maria or Kathy can speak more to whether such an impact analysis has already been conducted and submitted. But if not, I would identify that as a very important step for protection of Wicomico County. So as we've noted, and as I mentioned at the beginning, this facility is proposing to come in as a compost facility. And that's because composting is one of those permitted uses that the county has already decided could be okay if it goes through the special exemption process and is found to meet those criteria we just talked about. And so here are just some definitions. The compost facility definition is quite broad. But you know, when you're looking at a definition, there's a certain amount of just basic layperson understanding of what a term means, and we all understand what composting is. And frankly, we don't have to take anyone's word but the applicant's word, and we're going to come to that slide next. But there are other potential facilities, potential facility types in this definition, you know, that may be more appropriate for a facility like this. Sludge handling, my understanding is that the proposal includes municipal sludge as part of the waste stream, things like that. So if I can get the next slide, please. And so I say we don't really need to think about it too much, because Earthcare's representatives have been quite clear that this is not a compost facility. And so this is a record that Maria was describing, that she and others have acquired through public records requests. And so in bold here, highlighted, as you know, our ultra high temperature gasification system has no resemblance to composting. Next slide, please. Again, despite the proposed facility not being a composting facility. So there really is no ambiguity on the record that's being built here that this is not a compost facility, which from my perspective indicates that this is not a permittable use under a special exemption. And so that is another really important thing for the board to understand and to appreciate. And I'm not saying that something like this could never happen, but typically the appropriate route would be for the county to consider the project for what it is. And if necessary, amend county code to allow it. This is not, yeah, again, a special exemption and these permitted uses are not catch-alls. You don't just say, oh, well, what's the closest thing that we might be able to shoehorn into? That's not how the code is written. That's not how the code is supposed to be interpreted. Next slide. this is simply to note that sort of not assigning malintent or anything, but it does appear that the applicant is talking out of both sides of their mouth, because when looking to get a $2.24 million grant, now it's okay, let's make sure to characterize this as a compost facility. So when it serves their purposes, it is a compost facility. When it doesn't, it's not. And I've been doing this long enough now that this is a trend. This is typical. I see this a lot, where facilities of this nature, novel sort of gas production facilities, or these facilities that are proposing to have some novel quote unquote management of factory farm waste, want to characterize their facilities in bizarre and sometimes disingenuous ways, again, to shoehorn in and to follow the path of least resistance, as opposed to following the law as written and being forthcoming with the public about the true nature of what may or may not end up, in your backyard or in your community. And with that, I'll pass it back to Maria.
Thank you, Tyler. Thank you so much for explaining that to us. You definitely made it easier to understand. I know it's tough for me going back years, going into zoning codes. It's very unfamiliar, so you made it very simple. So thank you. Next, we have Kathy Martin. Kathy has worked on CAFO issues for the past 24 years and in 25 states across the country. She has a BS in petroleum engineering and an MS in civil engineering from the University of Oklahoma. Her skill set includes evaluations of local, state, and federal environmental regulations and multimedia permitting, including state and federal permits for air, water, and waste. So Kathy, we're going to turn it over to you and flip to the next slide.
Thank you, Maria. And thanks for everyone for sticking through to this point. We're midway through our presentation. So just as background, I did take a snapshot of the gasification machinery as from the applicant's a PowerPoint presentation that they had provided to Wicomico County. And again, this was from some information we received through the public information access process. And so this is definitely a large mechanical process with a furnace and conveyor belts and such, and has no resemblance to a composting windrow activity that someone might, a layperson might consider to be composting. We think about composting out in locally in our gardens or whatever, but also a lot of municipalities compost yard waste, and those are like large piles of yard waste in long rows that are turned, and temperature is measured, and they compost by a very particular process. And but there's not very much machinery actually involved. This is actually a process of taking feedstock, be it poultry litter or whatever, putting it into some hoppers. Then there's some conveyor belts and auger system that transfer this raw material through a drying system. And then once it's dried, it's dumped into a oven or a refractory lined facility, where then the temperature is at such a point that the all those ingredients are volatilized. And in the case of gasification, that's actually a word that's reserved for a specific temperature zone for that heating of the raw materials. So we're talking about, in their proposal, they're claiming that they would be between 700 and 1200 degrees Celsius. So basically greater than 1200 degrees Fahrenheit, if you guys want to think of it in that way. So really, really hot. And as those organic materials in, let's say, poultry litter, which would have some sawdust and obviously feces and urine, urease from the poultry themselves, that would volatilize, and the heat from that and the gases would then be just captured in the hottest part of the oven. There is excess heat that this particular facility has designed where it will spin that heat around to dry the incoming materials. So it's all in a complete package. Okay, next slide. I do want to talk about the sequence of events on the location of this gasifier. The original proposal to the Maryland Department of Agriculture in the grant application was for a place on New Hope Road, some farmland owned by a gentleman named Ray Ellis, who is a manure hauler for poultry litter. And there was going to be a venture company between Ray Ellis and Earthcare to transport the poultry litter to this place because Mr. Ellis had access to copious amounts of poultry litter. That location was rejected, and then a second location on your right was proposed on Old Eden Road. And I think Maria referred to that was when she first got involved, the community around that location. That location had a problem with respect to percolation tests for their sewage, their domestic sewage disposal. They will have, I believe, 2 full-time employees, so they're going to have a septic tank, and the soil in that area would not percolate and pass the sewage test. So that location was abandoned. This is also this is information that we learned from public information requests to the Maryland Department of Agriculture emails. Okay, then there was if you go back, I think there was a third location, Maria. Yeah, so this is actually a snapshot of a survey that Earthcare provided to, I think it was in an email. You may recognize a few things. If you look at the top left-hand side, you see that Owens Road curve where it meets Brick Kiln, and Brick Kiln Road would be on the left side of the drawing. And then you'll see some parcels, some rectangular parcels. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. The bottom parcel where there's some arrows and a red outline. That red outline was the third proposed location for the gasifier. And I'm going to call that the south end of some land that had become available because the railroad right away was going to be removed from the deed. And now you can go to the next slide. And that location was abandoned, and they picked this particular location, which is at the north end of that larger parcel of land. And so this is at the intersection of Owens Road and Brick Kiln Road. And this particular image is also a snapshot from a site plan that was conveyed to the regulators that shows a couple of different things. If you see the square on the left-hand side, that would be where the septic leach field would be. There's a rectangle on the bottom right. That's a stormwater lagoon proposed location. And then the rectangle with the dark rectangle next to it in the center of this parcel is basically where the gasifier would be located. And that's where trucks bringing in the poultry litter and other raw materials, that's where they would enter and dump. Okay, so next slide, please. So now we're just looking at a close-up of the Google Earth image that was available. And I want to talk about a little bit about what's around that general vicinity. The proposed location is that wooded area. right at the, if you recognize the little median of Owens Road and Kiln Road, there's a forest there. So that has to actually be removed in order to build this particular facility. If you go to the east or the left, across the road is the Maryland Food Bank. If you go north of this facility and to the west, that would be the Wicomico County Solid Waste Department offices. There's a recycling center, and then if you continue to go northwest is the landfill. But just to give ourselves a understanding of where we're going, where it's proposed. Next slide, please. In the document submitted to Wicomico County, there and the Maryland Department of Ag. No, let's go backwards to the flow chart. Thanks. So do the slide in between. Anyway, there's a flow chart backwards. You're going the wrong direction. There you go. There you go. So this is a flow diagram. I'm not going to get into too much detail, but this is some information that kind of reflects what I was talking about. There's let's look at the top. Let's see, where do I want to start you from? Let's look at the bottom left-hand side where there's a circle. And what they're trying to say is any air emissions that come off of the gasifier, remember, we're talking about basically burning organic waste, right, to volatilize it, to turn it into ash. And there's going to be gases that come from that. And so even though they're going to trap the heat from those gases to basically dry their inputs in a rotary dryer, there still has to be an exhaust of those gases at some point. So on the left-hand side is a discussion of how this facility may try to treat those gases before they're emitted. Now, at the county level, the county has no procedure for evaluating what someone might call the engineering of the proposal. This is not what would be submitted, or not the detail that would be submitted to, say, the Maryland Department of Environment, where they might have to actually get an air permit, okay? But this is kind of a crude representation of the flow through of the facility. When they get an air permit, they're going to have to describe in much more detail the types of pollutants in the gas, the amount of pollutants that are generated depending on the feedstock and the amount of feedstock that goes through the gasifier, and that they're going to have to give some efficiencies for their proposed chemical scrubbers or biofilters or cyclones, or things that are purported to reduce the particulates or the dust, things that are purported to reduce any organics that have that are still in the exhaust, et cetera, before it is exhausted into the community. All right, I think that's about all but I do want to emphasize a couple of things. So in the dead center of the flow chart, they talk about broiler litter at 30% moisture is augered to the drum roller at 3.5 tons per hour. That drum roller is where they're going to try to dry it some more before they put it into the gasifier, right? And it just says poultry litter, right? It doesn't say anything else. And then there's some temperature and some biochar discharge at 1,000 pounds per hour, and some other interesting information there. On the bottom left, where it says triple pass rotary drum dryer evaporates 10,000 pounds of water per hour, and it gives you a temperature degree. Anyway, there's some information there. It's very, very limited information. So, all right, next slide. Tyler talked about the fact that, you know, both the applicant and the Maryland Department of Agriculture understand that a gasifier is not a composting facility. I think everybody in this call can understand that an oven that's running at 1800 degrees Fahrenheit is not a composting facility. Actually, composting occurs at about 130 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. It is a very low temperature system. This is at 1800 degrees. So let's say more than 10 times the temperature of a composting facility. Now, let's talk about this email. This is a communication between Mr. Thomas of Earthcare and Clark Meadows, who's in the Wicomico County zoning office. And there's a discussion about the end products and the fact that that Earthcare would like to install a second gasifier on site in order to make productive use of the 12 million BTU of waste heat per hour that would otherwise be stranded if we were only drying and gasifying boiler litter. And I highlighted the highest value organic waste for us to process simultaneously is dewatered municipal sewage sludge and dewatered DAF sludge. Now, DAF stands for dissolved air flotation. And in your neck of the woods, DAF sludge is going to come from poultry processing facilities. And that's going to be the fats, oils, and greases that's removed from the wastewater stream of the slaughter plants and is dissolved air flotation. The fats, oils, and greases are floated to the top of a treatment tank and they're removed, and it has a very specific name, and it has you know, a high caloric content, so it has some energy value. What Earthcare is saying that it'll be great because the haulers of these types of waste will pay a tipping fee to Earthcare to take those wastes. Whereas when they burn the poultry litter, Earthcare actually has to buy that from the farmer, right? The grower. So this way here, they're saying that this tipping fee will help us offset the cost of the broiler litter, which we must pay for. But they would use the same types of equipment for the emissions and odors when processing both wastes. Next slide. They did say that they were in the process of working on their applications for air quality, et cetera, with the Maryland Department of Environment. And Maria has asked for copies of those types of communications from the permitting divisions. So that's what this slide is basically an email communication between the biosolids division at Maryland Department of Environment and Mr. Thomas at Earthcare. And note that he says, you know, the biosolids division is only going to get involved if you actually utilize sewage sludge. But once you do, the entire facility will be considered a sewage treatment plant. That's according to state law. Now, if you remember or think back in the definitions that Tyler went through, there is a definition for sewage treatment in that table, but it also requires a special exception. Okay, but what concerns me as a technical person that's going through permit application materials and comparing it to regulations is what is being told to that particular regulatory agency, and how do their rules affect the what's being proposed. And if you're proposing a poultry litter only gasifier, not talking about the sewage sludge or anything like that in your actual application package, then that's perceived as one type of a facility. But in the email communications, the county is aware that Earthcare would like to process more profitable waste streams, such as municipal sewage sludge and the DAF sludge. Well, right away, if Mr. Meadows at Wicomico County was keeping up to date, mind you, this is July 12th of last year, long before today in 2022, right? So more than at least let's say a half a year of knowing that this was the intention of Earthcare to build a second gasifier at this location to process waste that would not be poultry litter. But that was not communicated, even though there is a category in the zoning regs for sewage treatment. It also requires a special exception. But there was a continued push to cover this as composting. And, you know, I hate to be a cynic, but composting has such a, you know, has a warmer, cozier feeling to the general public than sewage sludge does, right? But actually, if this had been called a sewage sludge facility, it would have been more truthful, especially when we look at how long ago Earthcare had been considering this second gasifier at the same location. And let's see, what is the next slide? All right, and this is we'll just end with the picture of the Ecochar. Ecochar is actually a trademark name by Earthcare for biochar. This biochar is a term of art that's been given to any type of output from a pyrolysis or a gasifier system. You know, the pyrolysis is at a lower temperature than the gasification system, and that does affect what types of state and federal regulations are applicable. But this is basically what Earthcare, this picture was sent by Earthcare to the Wicomico County, that this is what they would produce, and the basic measurement against a ruler, a very fine particulate matter. It's a lot of dust. They also provided links to a video that showed the land application of this dark material through a typical poultry litter spreader, which folks in your area have seen that, where basically there's a truck with a bed full of poultry litter, and at the back of the bed there's an arm that kind of flings out the poultry litter. Well, a similar type of truck was in that video, but it was flinging out this biochar, which is much more fine. The texture is much more fine, much more smaller particles, and it created this huge dust cloud. Anyway, there it is on YouTube, so it could be watched. This would present a different type of problem when and if it's ever land applied in other, you know, as its final disposal. Now, there's a couple of final things I'd like to say before we go to the last speaker, is that the gasification process actually densifies the nutrient content. There is lots of nitrogen, phosphorus, but the biochar that's left is dense in the nitrogens and phosphorus and heavy metals. All right, and depending on if there's sewage sludge in it, you're going to have some polyaromatic hydrocarbons as well, which are an interesting health issue. And this is the proposed end disposal of this biochar by Earthcare is that they would recycle some of it back to the poultry farms that provided the poultry litter in the first place. They would recycle back part of this as the bedding in the barns. I don't believe it could be the entire bedding, but it would be a portion of that bedding. And so at some point, if they're having this agreement with the same poultry farm over and over again, the amount of the poultry litter that they get back to their gasifier is not going to be a pure sawdust and fecal material. It's going to be a sawdust, biochar, and fecal material. So it's going to have a little bit different feed ratio. But the other idea was to pack it in big sacks and transport it out from their property. But there's no knowledge of where it's actually going to end up. You know, where is it going to be land applied? And that's unfortunate because there are some holes in the environmental regulatory scheme. Once the poultry litter leaves the growers, you know, the actual barns where it's generated, once it leaves there and it goes to a hauler, then the public has less and less access to where it finally ends up, okay? So this is actually, you know, a gasification facility actually becomes like a black hole of knowledge of, okay, where are these nutrients going once it's been put into this format? And that to me is an additional concern outside of the Wicomico County regulatory scheme, but something that people need to keep in mind. And with that, I will send it back to Ms. Maria.
Thank you. And now we're going to bring on Dr. Wilson. And I'm sorry, we're going to go a little bit over. And if the speakers can stay on to answer a couple questions, that would be great. So Dr. Jacoby Wilson is well known here in our circles. He has done
Maria, skip my intros so we can
Okay,
save time.
skip our intro. We're going to save time. Dr. Wilson is an environmental scientist with the University of Maryland. Go ahead, Dr. Wilson. On to you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think all three of the presenters before me really covered a lot of important issues. So I'll just try to summarize a little bit and reflect on some of the environmental justice concerns that everyone should think about. So as Kathy mentioned, there were some, you know, there's some pollutants of concern with this process. So even though it's different, gasification is different than incineration. It has some of the similar issues. Air pollution, water pollution has been mentioned. Disposal of the ash. I love the term biochar, ecochar, all these euphemisms, y'all. Just beautiful. Water for cooling purposes, health, safety, and odor impacts, disincentives for waste reduction in some ways, and then also diversion of the waste from composting. Specific pollutants of concern, you know, you have these facilities produce gas, of course, carbon monoxide and hydrocarbon oils, char has already been stated. Emissions can may include nitrogen oxide, so NO2, sulfur dioxide, so criteria pollutants. Of course, particulate matter, as Kathy just mentioned. And so think about, as Kathy mentioned, that dust, that's particulate matter. We all know some of the health effects of fine particulate matter on human health, you know, asthma, blood pressure issues, scarring of alveoli. It can get into the circulatory system, lead to other adverse health effects. You have, you know, greenhouse gases as well that are produced, carbon dioxide, acid gases, depending upon the waste streams, the feeder stock, as Kathy and others mentioned. You can have issues with metals like lead, cadmium, mercury, also odor issues. So you think about you know, potential odor impacts, and as Kathy mentioned, there's some uncertainty about the scrubbing processes and how they're going to reduce the emissions, the volatiles, and other emissions from the facility. Mercury, cadmium, dioxins, and furan. So again, some of the same contaminants of concern, pollutants of concern that impact human health that you have in incineration. You have some of those same concerns with this operation. So you got to think about the cumulative impacts of these emissions on local air quality and how that could adversely impact human health, particularly if you have any susceptible populations that live nearby, right? So children, elderly, you know, the typical population, some folks with underlying health issues. Also, since you already have a landfill in close proximity, think about the cumulative impacts of having the landfill and its emissions and impacts on air quality, on water quality, other impacts, and then this new facility. So you think about the feedstocks being brought in through the truck, so the diesel exhaust, the dust, and then the transport of the final products from the facility. So the life cycle assessment inputs in what are the environmental health impacts, the process itself, what are the environmental human health impacts, and the outputs, what are the environmental human health impacts. And then, you know, Tyler made some really important points about some of the legal issues. One of the things I like to raise in Maryland, there tends to be an abuse of special exceptions in the state of Maryland. So we've seen that in other cases with other types of facilities. So that's important to highlight. From an environmental justice perspective, I think you also have some issues with procedural inequities as it relates to the access to public notice, having public notice in languages for folks who may be linguistically isolated, right? You know, the Haitian Creole population, your Spanish-speaking populations, that's an issue. I believe also you can have distributed justice issue again with having the cumulative impacts of the facility in these particular communities. And there's another issue or so that I wanted just to highlight. I think it's important to note, again, the water quality impacts and what's already happening in the community. If you have folks who are on well water who live nearby, we want to think about potential impacts on that population, particularly if this facility has any discharge. I think Kathy mentioned a septic field, and so those concerns. And I think that's it. I think everybody really did a good job. I think, one of the things I also just want to highlight, I'm not sure it's the case, and maybe Tyler can talk about this. They received this grant, right? And they've already gotten this money. Should they have gotten the money before they went through all these processes? That to me kind of defeats the purpose, going back to, I don't know, Monica's point, because it's taxpayers' dollars. So I think the taxpayers should have better say in this facility, getting the permits. So I think there's procedural issues there. And I was just going to recommend, you know, one of the things about environmental justice is you have federal dollars. If you know those dollars are federal dollars, then I think it's an opportunity, not just environmental justice, just submit an administrative complaint. The fact that the community's voice wasn't really heard in the process of their dollars going to a facility that is, what's the right term, Tyler? A use, maybe multiple uses, Kathy, that are incongruent with the zoning, not just one use, but actually multiple uses, right? That are incongruent with the current zoning standards. So I just want to, there's a couple nuggets that I want to highlight, but the public health impacts, as Kathy said, there's a lot there. So going back to what's happened with MDE and permitting, whether it be environmental impact statement, they should have to do baseline air quality monitoring. They should have to do a baseline impact assessment, regardless of, to me, if it's a USDA related or, I'm not USDA, Maryland Department of Ag related or MDE related. So some type of baseline impact assessment to inform whether or not they should receive the permits in the first place, that needs to occur as well. So I just wanted to add that, and I'll pass the mic to you, Maria. Thank you.
Okay.
Maria, can I add just one more thing?
Sure.
Just the grant application, the MDA grant is a invoice reimbursement procedure.
Okay.
So they have to spend the money first. But yes, that's all I wanted to add, just to make sure we're on track.
Yep, thank you.
And I can add one more thing. Dr. Wilson, you mentioned about the money. I know I had asked that of the Maryland Department of Agriculture. As of yet, they told me they have not received payments, but I think that you're correct that people and a complaint should be filed, because the original location of this facility, like Kathy said, this is the 4th location, and the fact that they did not take in account the use. This is being represented as a composting facility. We all know this is much more than this now, and the fact that this money is being used in an area which is a high minority and already has problems with high levels of asthma, public health. I think this is something that we should be talking about because it seems rather unfair. So with that, I want to hit a couple of the questions. And the first question, it looks like came in from Keith, which is the proposed commercial facility is commercial, where it's zoned, it seems like an industrial. How is such a facility allowed in an area surrounded by residential districts? And Tyler, I think you touched on that a little bit, but you want to respond to that?
Sure. Yeah, the site is actually in an I2 zone, so a heavy industrial district. And so, you know, it is not currently commercial, trying to masquerade as commercial to get through. I think that answers your question, Keith.
Yes, and then we had questions from Joe Jankowski. And I think Kathy touched a little bit on the air. Do composting facilities have any special air or water quality requirements? Second question, what solid waste would be produced by the gasifier? How would it be disposed of? And I think Kathy answered the second one. Kathy, what about the first one? Do they have special air or, well, we know air. How about water quality requirements?
Right. Well, there will be if they construct the facility, there will be a federal stormwater construction permit that will be required, and that's just during the construction phase. And they do have a stormwater impoundment that's going to be on site to capture any contaminated runoff, possibly from the transfer of the feeds from the incoming trucks. You know, they're going to be bringing in truckload and truckload of poultry litter. They're going to be bringing in truckloads of apparently sewage sludge and DAF. All of those things are going to be, you know, have odors, could have particulates from the poultry litter. There'll be no control over that other than maybe a cover on the trucks. So any what we would call fugitive emissions from just the trucks coming in and out of the facility are hopefully they would be addressed through the air permit. They would be considered fugitive emissions. But the actual emissions from the gasifier would have to go through an air quality permit, which has not been, the permit application has not been submitted. But there has been, I'll just say two more things. The applicant did submit 2 letters from the EPA claiming some various requirements under the Clean Air Act. So those are details probably beyond this conversation.
Okay, and we had a question from Gabby about the end result, the product, and I think we touched on that. That would be the Ecochar, which they're planning to use either for bedding or for land application. Correct, Kathy? Okay, from that, let me see. Okay, somebody said if they already have the grant, it seems the decision has already been made. And I'm not sure that's necessarily true if they have not secured a location. I'm not really sure. And I think that people could still file a complaint against that because there is no location secured for that. And we are waiting for additional documents. We do have PIA requests in still waiting for documents. Let's see. Okay, somebody had wrote the effort submitting a proposal called one thing, a composting facility that is something different from what it truly is. A gasifier is misleading both the public and public officials. Unfortunately, this is done in Sussex County too. We've had this problem in Delaware with the facilities for a biogas facility coming in as a composting. The federal government and states should outlaw this and disqualify applicants, specific individuals in particular, from future submissions. Yeah.
So can I address that? So let me be very clear. When this facility applies for permits at the state level for an air permit, it will not be called a composting facility. It will be called what it is, a gasifier. The idea of lumping this under the composting definition is a Wicomico County unique solution apparently come up with between the zoning officer and the applicant. And it may not even be the applicant's choice. That's just what the zoning said. We're going to call you a composting facility. And but once it gets to the state permitting, this will be a gasifier at the air department. If it's got sewage sludge, it will be handled through the biosolids division at the Department of Environment. And there will be no more calling it a composter. Okay.
Jacoby, did you want to add to that? I saw. No, you're good? Okay. The next we had a comment from Yule asking, is this similar to cremation?
In the respect that something is being burned at a very high temperature, yes, but there are some temperatures for this facility that the temperature range is what we call a gasifier. If the temperature was higher, it might be called if the gases that were generated were handled a little differently, it might be called an incinerator. And these are all terms of art from the Federal Clean Air Act. So without getting in the weeds, I'll stop at that.
Okay, and then we have a question here from Shelley. That is, what is the actual ownership of Earthcare LLC? Do they have other similar operations elsewhere? And what is the actual situation at those other operations? So I can answer a little bit, and I know Kathy can answer a little bit on this. I know that they have a facility in Indiana. I know from some questions that were asked, what we learned there is that they have some problems with running it regularly. The operator had mentioned that it's often maybe once a week not running. There are odor complaints. I heard there was approximately 2 houses within 5 miles. And the process seems to have a high level of phosphorus in the end product, which is a problem when we talk about Maryland with the phosphorus on the fields and the phosphorus management tool. That's what I know. I know Kathy knows a little bit more about some of their other operations.
Right, the Indiana operation is with turkey litter, and the extra BTUs are used to, I believe, go back to heat the barns. Then there's a facility they're proposing in Pennsylvania that that would be burning egg layer waste and municipal sludge and some Friday things. I don't believe we know much about if it's online or yet. And there is a facility in Ohio that is related to a dairy, I believe a dairy facility. And then I believe in the communications between Earthcare and MDA, they do refer to a facility in Russia and one in Saudi Arabia. And I believe that they have 11 gasification facilities of various shapes and sizes.
Yes. Okay, and we have another question from Joe Jankowski. Will comments from Worcester County residents carry any weight? I think I would tend to think that because the feedstocks are coming in from a lot of different places with the traffic, I think that could carry weight for the area in terms of that way. I don't know. Anybody else want to weigh in on that? I think definitely in terms of the grant. Gabby, I see a hand. Gabby would like to weigh in. Gabby, we're going to unmute.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
All right, awesome. Thank you. So just real quick to answer Joe's question, because I figured this was going to come up. It most definitely does, because they're taking waste from several different locations. As most people know that are residents here on the shore, there's poultry everywhere, and we don't really know how it's being tracked. We know MDE has been very lax on regulations, and this is polluting our air. This is something that's going to affect a lot of people, and we're not talking about the deposition of the nutrients that are going to fall into our waterways, into our streams, our creeks, as well as impact the community. So I do believe from previous experiences that outside residents outside of Wicomico is definitely valid. Because this is something that if this facility is allowed, it's only going to continue growing, and we're only going to get more permits. I mean, you can see what's happening in Delaware right now, and it's just frankly outrageous. And the more that people don't involve themselves with situations like this, the more we're going to see these facilities pop up in all of our communities. So I definitely think it's valid. And of course, as the coast keeper, I will also, be helping out Wicomico County, even though I'm no longer a resident.
And one more thing I want to add, because this is public money in this, I would say definitely if you're a Maryland resident, you most certainly should have a say in that. I would encourage every Maryland resident to weigh in on that. It's important. We do have a question next from Shelley about how about the escape or polluting gases like methane, and is there a danger of explosion?
Okay, there are a couple of parts of the process where the temperature of the gasifier has to be controlled. And let's say there's a buildup of clogged pipes or something where the air is being circulated, and so a temperature fluctuation occurs. Then the applicant Earthcare did provide a multiple page analysis of how the actual gasifier would work, and so there are different parts of it that could become a fire hazard, etc. But there, of course, are solutions for that. One of them is misting. That when the biochar comes out of the gasifier, it's very hot, and it has to be cooled down, and they do that with a mist of water, and they have to cool it down to a certain temperature to prevent spontaneous combustion. So this is not like an inert industry coming in. This is something that is taking organic material and burning at very high temperatures, generating a lot of gases. It's a finely tuned machine that has many moving parts, and problems can occur. All right. And then I wanted to say one more thing about the air emissions. The raw feedstock like poultry litter and DAF and sewage sludge, those are all highly odoriferous feedstocks. And they're going to put them in. They're going to transfer them from a truck to a hopper. Now the proposal is the hopper would be indoors, and that air would have a negative pressure that would suck that air through their air treatment system. But because of the proposal level that we're at, which is at the county, we have not seen actual engineering drawings that show how that airflow through is actually going to work in practice. When you have a truck that's, basically have a garage door open and a truck dumping material, there is going to be some odors released from that. And I just want to make that clear while I had your attention.
Okay. And then we had a question, or I guess it's a comment from Yule. For biogas in Seaford, Maryland residents and orgs commented in favor. Yeah, there was a lot of resentment in Delaware when some organizations came to Delaware to comment in favor of the biogas facility in Seaford. There were some articles written about that, and I think some of those recipients were recipients of some poultry industry money, donations or grants or something. I would just say that a lot of Maryland residents that I know in organizations commented against the facility in Delaware and do not approve of any neighbors being exposed like this to pollutants and emissions, and especially when you're talking about areas of little political power where they cannot fight back against it. So hopefully folks will remember that we need to stand together on these types of issues, because it's not okay for anyone to be exposed. And we have one more. What happens if there's a long power outage? Any unexpected outcome from the interruption in the process?
I guess I really don't have an answer for that, except that it's a self-powered facility. But yes, they do require power. They have a shutdown procedure. And again, we're dealing with the type of information that has been proposed thus far that's in the public record that that Maria requested access to, that we could read. A lot of that material doesn't go into this type of detail, unfortunately, which means decisions have been made without that kind of information, and that's disturbing all unto itself. But I do believe there needs to be a fire protection plan. I think there needs to be an emergency plan that is submitted to the county, so that people in that neighborhood know how an accident at the facility will be responded to by their local fire department, etc. I think that's an important thing to think about.
Okay, we're going to have one more final question before next steps and final comments. And this is from Shelley. If those funds are for cleanup of the environment and the LLC filed for the grant under fraudulent circumstances, can the funds be clawed back? Is it against Maryland law to remove forested areas which combat air pollution? And I'm not sure that it would be fraudulent, because I don't think the money has been. I think comments again could be made about the location if it's not the original, and the way it's being used and misrepresented. And I would encourage people in Maryland to definitely get in touch with the Maryland Department of Agriculture about the grant. I am not sure. I know there are probably some type of within the counties where you can't remove forested areas, or you would have to plant more trees in another area. I'm sure it's similar to like what we have in Sussex County. And what I want to do is talk about next steps and then give our presenters a final comment. What we have in the works right now, as Kathy mentioned, I have PIA requests in. I think it is absolutely mandatory that the residents of Wicomico County, now that this has all come out into the open, unfortunately, not because the Public Information Act was granted, because it was not. Extreme pressure had to go on to get this information out to the public. But now that it is, I think that the Wicomico County residents need to go to the county council and ask some questions about this. How did this happen? How is it that this is coming in front of the Board of Appeals? Why aren't PIA requests, which is the law, being fulfilled? And we need to have an open discussion now that we know this is not a composting facility, and next steps, what is going to be done. So I would strongly recommend that. I will update everyone with the emails when we get the PIA requests back from the county. What we know is that the applicant, the email that we got back from the county said the applicant has postponed the hearing. So I'm waiting for follow-up with PIA to find out what's going on. With that, I'm going to turn it over, and we'll do reverse order this time. I know Tyler had to jump off. Dr. Wilson, Jacoby, any final comments for people?
No, I just think just chiming on what you said, Maria, we need to make sure the public is participating, that they know what's going on, and they actually show up and show out. I mean, as Monica said, I mean, this is your fundamental, it's your money as a taxpayer. So would you use your own money if you knew it was your money to poison yourself? No. So I think we need to make sure everybody knows what's happening with this facility, what are potential impacts, put in the larger context of what's happening. And also, as Monica said, I know Monica, let Monica speak for herself, but you deserve better. Bring other types of infrastructure, other types of economic opportunity structures to, I'm gonna say our, because this is our community, to your community, to our community. And that should be the way I think people should fight. We want opportunity, but we want an opportunity that poisons us. We don't want an opportunity that impacts our public health. We want an opportunity that impacts, our children. We don't want our opportunities that impact, our natural environment. So thank you, Maria. I'll pass the mic back to you.
Okay, and from there, next was Kathy, and then we'll go on to Monica. Tyler had to jump off. Monica, Kathy?
Yeah, from what I read, there's only going to be 2 employees, so there's not a lot of jobs associated with this facility, but there's going to be a lot of truck traffic. There's going to be waste from outside. There's going to be, problems with odors, noises, smells. That is not beneficial and not something that lifts the community. And I'll live with that.
Very good. Monica, last thoughts?
Yes, at the end of the day, I just want everyone to know that you do have a voice and you have a right to use that voice. Just because something seems like it's a shoo-in, you don't have to take it lying down. The way we were able to defeat the 13 chicken houses is because we said, we're going to fight to the very end, and we will throw everything we have, even if it's not even real, imaginary or otherwise, in order to do what we have to do to fight for our communities. And I don't think any other person would do anything less for the sake of their families, for the sake of the future generations, the protection of our land, air, and our water, and it's certainly in an area that's already dealing with so many health issues already. So we don't have to deal with this. The other part I want to just say to people that this there's a bill, the RPS cleanup bill. So the RPS cleanup bill is for something just like this very thing. The way that it's set up is to prevent areas or entities that want to get under the green energy flag or promote themselves as good to climate change or what have you, to not be allowed to ride the green energy train. And so this is one of those types of things that's trying to present themselves as an angel of light when it's really an angel of death. So let's look at things for what they really are and call them out and stand up for our communities.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you to everyone who took time out of your night to attend. It is really, really important that we stand together. I'm glad that we have folks from Delaware and Maryland and the region, because this is a regional problem that we're dealing with. And we have, coalitions. I want to, raise the flag on this. There is a Mid-Atlantic Environment and Economic Coalition where we're working on issues like this. So join in. We need your voices. Demand transparency. It's not acceptable that something that is such a large scale like this be represented in such a misleading way as a compost. Had nobody caught it, it's very problematic. So I think a discussion is needed with Wicomico County on this project and transparency. It's vital to a democratic process. So thank you again, everyone, and to our presenters. Have a great night, and I will keep everyone that's on this list informed as PIAs come about. Please contact the county. Thank you. And please contact Maryland Department of Agriculture too, because that is your money. You know, contact them. All right. Thank you, everyone. Good night. God bless.